Good day, everyone. So glad to see you here at the Department of Archives and History today. My name is Steve Murray. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Food for Thought lecture for 2017. We have a fantastic schedule available for the rest of the year. If you do not have one of these schedules at home, you're going to want to pick it up, and there are copies out on the table behind the auditorium. Take that home, put it on your refrigerator, and be back here with us on the third Thursday of each month for wonderful programs on Alabama history. Next month's program is by Dr. Sharoni Green on family ties, hidden black-white relationships in antebellum Alabama. Let me take a moment to remind you, if you would, to take out your cell phone or other electronic device and go ahead and silence that or turn it off so as not to disrupt today's program. I also want to mention to you some other opportunities that are coming up that you'll want to join us. If you're not getting your fill of Alabama history, we've got a packed schedule available for you. So you be sure and come back and be with us. Coming up, starting on January 28th, something that we're very excited about is our joint exhibition called Sewn Together on Quilts in Alabama History. This is a joint project of the Archives and the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. That exhibition is taking place out at the Art Museum, opening on January 28th, but half of that exhibition comes from the collections here at the Department of Archives and History. There will be an online component, and we'll be putting out links to that on our website and other locations where you can find that and even enjoy components of that at home. We also have coming up on February 11th, Cultural Crossroads. I think this is the 15th annual Cultural Crossroads. This year's theme is Territorial Characters in Becoming Alabama. You'll want to be here for that fantastic program. You can go home and Google Landmarks Foundation Cultural Crossroads, and you'll get to the registration for that event. That's on a Saturday and is sure to be a wonderful program. Coming up even sooner, like this afternoon, so if you want to go get some lunch after today's program and come back at 2 o'clock, the Alabama Decorative Arts Symposium, Crossing Lines, Decorative Arts of the Alabama Territory, will start here in this building, continues this afternoon and in all day tomorrow. I think they will be taking walk-up registrations this afternoon, so if you're interested, grab some information about that at the back of the room this afternoon. Also, on your way out, you're going to want to be sure and stop by the table at the entrance because there are going to be complimentary copies of this issue of Alabama Heritage Magazine available with an article by today's speaker on a related topic, very related. But you'll want to take a copy of that home with you. We appreciate our partners at Alabama Heritage making this available to you today. There is also back there a stack of these subscription forms, and you want to take note of this because this form gives you the 2016 subscription rate rather than the increased 2017 subscription rate. So if you're not currently a subscriber, you're going to want to take one of these home, sign up and drop that in the mail this afternoon and become a reader of Alabama Heritage Magazine. It's a privilege to introduce our speaker today. Leah Rawls Atkins is a native of Birmingham. She was the first woman to earn a PhD in history at Auburn University. She taught history for many years at Auburn, at UAB, and at Samford University. She was the founding director of the Carolyn Marshall Draughon Center for the Arts and Humanities at Auburn University, and there delivered humanities programs to thousands of Alabamians across the state. She's the author of numerous books, including The History of Alabama Power Company, and we're gathered in the Alabama Power Auditorium here this afternoon. She is the co-author of Alabama, The History of a Deep South State, which will be re-released in a special bicentennial issue very soon. You'll want to be keeping an eye out for that. She also spent years in various leadership positions, and especially as secretary of the Alabama Historical Association, promoting public engagement with and interest in Alabama history and doing such important work in that organization. In addition, she's a member of the Board of Trustees of this agency and was a guiding spirit in the development of the Museum of Alabama exhibits upstairs. Years ago, when the state discontinued the teaching of Alabama history in the 9th grade, Leah railed against that boneheaded decision and then did something about it. adjusted to that new reality and worked with our staff here to develop Alabama Moments in American History, which is a resource guide for high school history teachers teaching American history but are still required to incorporate themes of Alabama history. She cares passionately about history education and wanted to be sure that our U.S. history teachers had the resources to continue to instruct young Alabamians on the many important ties between the histories of our state and our nation. Leah is a professor and mentor to generations of Alabamians, many of whom went on to work in the field. Several of them are here today. And even those who didn't work professionally in the history field left her classroom with an appreciation and very often a passion for history. She is an encourager, an advocate, and when needed, there to provide guidance and even some chastisement from time to time. And that's why so many of us think of her as Mama Leah. I first met Leah in the fall of 1993 when she was a guest lecturer in a graduate course on historical methods at Auburn, and I have been enchanted by her ever since. If you care a whit about the history of Alabama and its importance for shaping well-informed and engaged citizens of our state, then like me, you have a multitude of reasons to be grateful to this amazing woman. So please join me in welcoming Leah Atkins.
Yes, I have a rule in my library. Anything that deals with Auburn goes in an orange folder. I can't step away. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you coming and the opportunity to be with you and talk about a subject and a person that I care very much about and spent a lot of really good times listening to him spin stories. In 1951, Ralph Shug Jordan became the head football coach at Auburn University, then officially called the Alabama Polytechnic Institute. During the hiring process, much was said about Jordan's Selma background, his football playing and his coaching days at Auburn, and his work as a line coach for longtime head coach at the University of Georgia, Wally Butts. A few newspaper articles mentioned that Jordan was a World War II veteran, not particularly unusual in 1950-51, since 16.1 million Americans had served in that war, which had ended only 4.5 years before. Stories circulated during Jordan's first years at Auburn that he'd rather not talk about the war, so few people asked him about it. I did not discuss the war with him for almost 25 years. And then I discovered he enjoyed talking about his war experiences. As time passed, Coach Jordan understood that the war years had much to do with the man and the coach that he became, and he was comfortable in that. But before the war, for Jordan, there was Selma in Auburn. Ralph Shug Jordan was born in Selma, Alabama, September the 25th, 1910. In his adult years, he told stories about having to explain all the time to people exactly where Selma was. But after the Selma March in 1965, he delighted in telling people that Selma, Alabama was just a short walk from Montgomery. As I might note that as a college student, Jordan told me that he had made this walk more than once, both ways. Selma, Alabama was a trade and transportation center in the middle of Alabama's Black Belt cotton growing region. Jordan's father worked for the railroad, often away from home, which meant that he had more responsibility for his mother in the household. He received the nickname Shug because of his love of sugarcane. Because he was left-handed, he was also called Lefty. And when his assistant coaches were talking about him, they sometimes called him the left-hander, or more frequently would just say the man. Formerly, he was called Coach Jordan. Never was he called Shug or Ralph within the athletic department, except maybe by Jeff Beard, the athletic director, who had known Coach Jordan since they were both students at Auburn. Oh, and I should also mention that President Draughon's wife, Miss Caroline Draughon, Miss Caroline knew Coach Jordan at Selma High School. They were very good friends, and that's about all I've ever gotten out of that story. Jordan was a good high school athlete who participated in football, baseball, and basketball, but he was probably better in basketball. In high school, he loved basketball more than football. After high school graduation in 1928, Jordan entered Auburn. It was the eve of the 1929 stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. Jordan paid for his education by waiting on tables in boarding houses such as Miss Cora Hardy's and picking up odd jobs. His parents sent him all the money that they could, but it wasn't enough. Jordan graduated in the spring of 1932, not in civil engineering curriculum that he began in his freshman year. He had decided he wanted to coach football, and to get a job coaching in high school by Alabama law, he needed to have the requirements to teach an academic subject. So he switched to an education major. He looked forward to teaching history. However, that's not what happened. Jordan had interviewed and been offered a high school coaching position in a small North Alabama town his senior year before he graduated. But before he left Auburn for that job, the local school board in North Alabama learned that Coach Jordan was Catholic, and the board withdrew the offer of employment. Remember the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was still strong in Alabama. The story of Jordan losing his high school coaching job is well known. But what I never heard was the name of the Board of Education that changed its mind. Surely Coach Beard knew, but I never heard anyone mention it. Coach Jordan would not have told the name of the school system if asked, because that would have caused the school board to be criticized. And as disappointed as he was in losing his job, he did not want the board or to take part in any action that would make the board look bad. In fact, recently I've had 2 calls from people I don't know wanting to know what the name of that board was, and I said I didn't, which is the truth. Auburn's head coach at the time was Chet Wynn, who'd been an All-American at Notre Dame. Wynn was so upset at the way Jordan was treated that he adjusted his staff and made a place for Coach Jordan. David Housel, in his history of Auburn football, wrote that, quote, perhaps Wynn's greatest contribution to the future of Auburn football was keeping Shug Jordan at Auburn. As an Auburn student, Jordan was influenced by his history professor, Dr. George Petrie, who is remembered today for writing the Auburn Creed. Petrie was a University of Virginia graduate, a brilliant lecturer who scheduled current events talks in Langdon Hall for townspeople and students. Remember, during these years, 2 European men, Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany, became leaders with an aggressive nationalism. And the Auburn town and gown became well versed on the rise of fascism in Europe because of Professor Petrie's public lectures. Influenced by Petrie, Jordan became a student of history for the rest of his life. In 1957, when I entered the graduate program in Auburn's history department, Coach Jordan was very supportive. My husband, George, played football under Coach Jordan, and in 1955 began coaching for him. Whenever there was an athletic department social function, Coach Jordan would ask me, what courses are you taking? What are you researching? What are you reading? The conversation with him that I remember most fondly was after I had finished reading Douglas Southall Freeman's 4-volume biography of Robert E. Lee. I must confess to you, I didn't know it was 4 volumes when I selected it. I recall telling Coach Jordan that I thought volume 4 was the most significant in the set because Freeman detailed how, with Lee's father, Light Horse Harry Lee away, exiled in the Bahamas because of debt, Lee's mother, all alone, instilled in Robert and his brother the traits of character that made him a leader of men. I told Coach Jordan I thought that volume was relevant today, that military leaders, CEOs of corporations, athletic coaches, teachers, parents, and especially mothers raising sons alone should read this volume. He just smiled at me, his eyes twinkling as he said, I have all 4 volumes on my bedside table, and I agree with you. I want to share one more personal story of Coach Jordan before I begin the story of his World War II experiences, because this story speaks to Jordan's consideration for others, his sensitivity, his compassion, and even how in times of pressure of being a head coach, he remembered other people. It was in New Orleans, the night before the 1971 Sugar Bowl, when Auburn was playing Oklahoma. The Sugar Bowl committee was holding an elegant dinner for the official parties of both universities, including coaches and their wives. It was to be at Antoine's. I'd heard about dinner at Antoine's all my life. I was so excited. About an hour before the bus was to leave the hotel for the dinner, my husband George dashed into our room and breathlessly told me, as he grabbed his coat, that Coach Jordan had asked him to eat supper with the team and go with trainer Kenny Howard with the team to go to the movie. Now, I knew it was not appropriate for me to go to the movie with George and the team, and I thought I wasn't going to Antoine's either. Then George, over his shoulder as he went out the door, said, Coach Jordan wants you to go to Antoine's with him and Mrs. Jordan. Meet him in the lobby at 6:15. So instead of riding the bus with the assistant coaches and their wives, I sat on the back seat of a limo with Mrs. Jordan. Coach Jordan was in the front seat with our driver, a New Orleans policeman. We left the motel with 4 policemen riding motorcycles escorting us. 2 were in the front and 2 in the rear, and we flew through red lights and around stop traffic to the French Quarter and to Antoine's. I could never decide if the Oysters Rockefeller, dinner at Antoine's, or the limo ride was the most exciting event on my trip to New Orleans, and it certainly was not the bowl game we lost. A few months later, George resigned his coaching position, took a job in Birmingham, and we moved home. I began teaching at Samford University, and a few years later, I proposed a Jan term course on World War II. I called Coach Jordan and asked him if I could come and talk to him about his Second World War experiences to use in my lectures. He said, of course. And this is some of what he told me, with additional research so I could understand and add the historical context, although there are some things that I will point out to you that I'm still not exactly sure of, and maybe with all of you thinking about it, you may find the answer on the internet for me. Although World War II began when Germany invaded Poland in the fall of 1939, the United States did not enter the war until after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. Ralph Jordan was on the coaching staff at Auburn then, coaching basketball and football. After Pearl Harbor, he activated his military commission that he had earned upon graduation in 1932 because of his participation in the ROTC program. In 30 days, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers called, and he soon was on his way to a former U.S. Coast Guard base on Cape Cod. Camp Edwards had been turned into an amphibious training facility for soldiers headed overseas. Jordan was eventually assigned to the 1st Engineer Amphibian Brigade. His responsibilities were generally the same throughout the war: to take an active part in planning an amphibious landing with responsibility for logistics and establishing dumps, that's what they called them, not me, dumps on shore for reserve supplies, ammunition, gasoline, food, water, and medical supplies. Throughout the war, Jordan was one of the select people who knew the secret details of an invasion, where and when it was to happen. Using pre-war maps, recent aerial photographs, interviews with captured enemy soldiers, people who knew the area before the war, plus available data on tides and underwater obstructions, the invasion plans were made in great secrecy. Coach Jordan also needed to know what was behind the landing zone, where the roads were any backwater areas, the location of bridges beyond the beach. Regardless of how meticulous the research and the design, or how much training was involved, when the invasions began, nothing went according to plans. Winds and tide interfered with soldiers steering the landing crafts, and landings were never made exactly where they were supposed to be. And if you've seen The Longest Day, you probably remember seeing that scene where the soldiers have got their maps on the beach and they're trying to find out where they are. In the training for Jordan's first landing, his men were issued white, heavy, warm clothing and boots. Surely, they thought, they were headed to Norway. But Jordan had the tide variations because he had to be in charge of the landing boats. And he knew from those that they were headed south toward the equator. Jordan's first invasion came at Oran in French North Africa. The British and the Americans needed a base in the Mediterranean. The Americans had no idea what the North African French army would do, stay with the French government or support the Germans. Remember that France had occupied by the Germans Paris in the northern area, and then the southern area was Vichy France. Sam Pershing Doherty, whose World War II memoir On Hostile Shores that came out in 2003, was dedicated to Ralph Jordan. And he told stories of Jordan in North Africa, especially remembering Jordan's ability to find native foods. He did not like those K-rations and things, including the story of Jordan driving up in a Jeep with his front seat filled by huge fish. Jordan and Doherty were together under George S. Patton when Patton led an American army in the invasion of Sicily. Coach Jordan loved General Patton's aggressiveness, his determination to win, and his never quit attitude. Jordan heard some of Patton's speeches to the Army, and in post-war years, Jordan enjoyed telling Patton stories to his Auburn players and his coaches. Do you remember the opening scene from the movie Patton? George C. Scott, as General Patton, was on a stage wearing jodhpurs and a shiny helmet and slamming his riding crop against his thigh. The background was a huge American flag, and Scott, as General Patton, was giving his pre-invasion pep talk to his troops. And he actually did a talk to them on several occasions, and there are many different versions that you can check on the internet for some of the things that he said. Patton's words were laced with profanity, full of bad words and good words that were combined with really rough meanings. Let me assure you, Patton's speech was cleaned up for the movie version. One day when my husband, George, not George Patton and not George Scott, my George, came home for supper, he handed me a typed 3 legal-page transcription of what Patton said to his American troops, or at least one version of one talk that Patton said. Coach Jordan gave it to him, but he told George, "Don't you show this to Leah." But George came right home and showed me. After the Allies occupied the island of Sicily, by the way, I tried to find that before I came. I knew that I really couldn't read any of it, but I did try to find it. I know it's in a filing cabinet in a folder, and I'll keep looking for it, and if I find it, we'll come together again. After the Allies occupied the island of Sicily, the American army began crossing the Straits of Messina and moving north. The Italian army was on the ropes, but the more dangerous army in Italy was the German army, which was withdrawing northward up the Italian peninsula, but also were defending the rear as they were moving. To support the defeat of Italy, an American invasion, Operation Avalanche, was planned for Salerno, south of Naples. But on the 9th of September 1943, General Dwight Eisenhower announced, before he really was supposed to, that the Italians had agreed to an armistice. I want to say just a word about Salerno before I give a story of Coach Jordan in that area. I can't tell you what happened with Coach Jordan at Salerno. David Housel says that he was only in 4 invasions. If he was in 5, it's Salerno. And I know he was there, and I'm going to tell you a story in a minute that puts him right at Salerno, near Naples, when the invasion took place. I know he was there. I know he had planned the invasion. But the question is, did he get off that boat? And my general opinion is that somebody gave the orders at one point for these leaders who were the main thinkers and organizers and officers that sent them directly to England to begin planning for the cross-channel invasion of France. So whether we say he actually was, I know he was there. There's no question of that. And I'm still working on it, so maybe you can help me find the answers to some of this. Coach Jordan's favorite story from this period, and once he enjoyed telling many, many times. He loves to tell this story, which places him right at Naples and right at Salerno, was about being on an American ship off the western coast of Italy near Naples when the Italian volcano Vesuvius erupted, throwing blazing volcanic ash into the night sky. Standing on the deck of his ship, watching, Jordan turned to a Texan, one who was just boring everybody by telling stories of how bigger and better everything was in Texas than anywhere else. Jordan remarked to him, "I'll bet you hadn't got anything like that in Texas." To which the Texan replied, "No, but we sure have a fire department in Dallas that could put it out." Dorothy's memoir of the 1st Engineer Amphibian Brigade gives us some personal war stories. He notes that the brigade's civil engineers were about half from Clemson and half from Auburn, with some, including him, were Ohio State trained engineers. He wrote that the men loved sharing stories about Army-Navy rivalries and probably never read the War Department order that was sent immediately following the information that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. It said that there would be no more inter-service rivalry jokes, but I suppose they were really safe with the other entertainments that the brigade shared and enjoyed, fighting the American Civil War again and searching for a good stiff drink. With the Germans retreating to northern Italy and the Italian government signing an armistice, the 1st Engineer Amphibian Brigade was ordered to proceed to England to plan and train for the grand invasion of the Atlantic defenses that Adolf Hitler had been building since 1942. The often postponed invasion of Northern Europe. The brigade was briefly stationed in London, they loved that, but soon was transferred to Slapton Sands in Devonshire, where they began practicing launching, driving specialized motorized crafts that had been designed and manufactured in the United States for landing somewhere on the coast of Northern Europe. They were shallow draft vessels that could be driven up on the beach. The Cornwall and Devonshire beaches were similar to Normandy beaches. While I have not had the pleasure of walking the Utah beach where Coach Jordan landed, I have walked Omaha Beach. Remember that the beaches along Normandy coast are not like Destin and Panama City. In Normandy and England, the sand is firmer with a lot of gravel in it. In most places, the beaches are wider. There were also challenges to be faced because of the rough water in the English Channel and the winds that were normally very brisk. Slapton Sands gave the American soldiers exactly those kind of conditions to practice in. For weeks, Jordan was training a landing boat brigade that practiced maneuvering their boats in the rolling surf, landing them on the beaches, and doing it all over again. The dress rehearsal for D-Day was called Exercise Tiger, which should have made Shug Jordan very comfortable. I never heard any suggestion that he had an influence in suggesting the name. After detailing the training procedures when he was interviewed in the 1970s, Coach Jordan remarked, "And then we left for the invasion." For weeks, he had been taking his men to these training excursions at sea, and so I asked him, "How did you know when you left your quarters that you were going on the real mission?" He sort of cocked his head and smiled at me and replied that this time they told us to pack all of our personal possessions in our footlockers and put the name and address of our next of kin on top. He paused and added, "No one ever told us to do that before." And, of course, there was no more practice runs, and Operation Overlord was on. With blackened windows and dim lights, under orders of silence, the men were transferred by train to the port of embarkation. No one was talking as they left the train cars and were directed toward ships moored at docks or anchored at the harbor. Slowly, Jordan's LST filled with men, and when reaching capacity, the ships slowly began to move out into the English Channel to wait. Years later, Jordan told his family that he had something hidden that night, perhaps in his boot. Ralph Jordan Jr. and I have talked the last couple of months about several things, and this was one. And Ralph said he thought his dad said it was in his wallet. And I said, well, he had a dog tag. I don't think he was going to land on Normandy Beach with a wallet. So we've really talked about, and we don't know whether it was in his wallet or in his boot, but he had this. It was a clipping from the January 21st, 1944 student newspaper, the Auburn Plainsman. It was the first published short statement written by Jordan's history professor, Dr. George Petrie, and it was called The Auburn Creed. The weather was so bad over Britain, the English Channel and northern France, that General Dwight D. Eisenhower delayed the invasion for 24 hours, hoping for calmer seas and less wind. But the added time increased the misery for 2,876,000 British, American, Canadian, and Australian soldiers, sailors, Marines, engineers, many who had been teachers, salesmen, preachers, mechanics, who were now soldiers and part of Operation Overlord. Men bound for the coast of France, men who understood that many of them would not live through tomorrow. Their goal was to breach the Atlantic Wall, which the German engineers assured the Führer was impossible to penetrate. When that vast armada moved out into the English Channel, Ralph Jordan recalled that the smells were of fuel, backed up toilets, and puke. The men, so packed together and crowded, were eerily silent. Looking back, Jordan observed that there were no atheists in the boats that landed on the beach that June morning in 1944. When dawn came, ships were everywhere. Jordan recalled being happy to learn that he was not invading Europe alone. Ralph Jordan landed on Utah Beach on June the 6th, 1944 at H plus 2 hours. Let me also tell you that there is a nice letter that's circulating periodically on the internet that says he landed at Omaha Beach. He did not. In fact, I don't think he ever was really on Omaha Beach. He found on the beach when he got there was already a barbed wire fence enclosure containing German prisoners under guard. Medics had set up medical tents, were treating wounded, and plasma was hanging from rifle butts, bayonets buried in the sand. Yet Germans continued to shell the beach with their 88mm anti-tank, anti-aircraft artillery. On the afternoon of Jordan's arrival on Utah Beach, he was wounded by shrapnel from a German 88mm. Henry K. McCard was there with him on the beach and witnessed his pain and fever and saw what he called a quiet type of heroism. More seriously wounded soldiers were tended to first. Jordan had to wait. Without sleeping for hours, he was looking forward to getting a whiff of ether while the doctor dug out the metal and stitched his wound. But it didn't happen that way. The doctor recognized Jordan's southern accent and his name from the doctor's days stationed at Fort Benning. And so the doctor told his assistant he'd just give Jordan a local anesthetic so they could visit and talk Georgia-Auburn football. And that's what happened on Utah Beach. There is a fuller story of this in Coach Jordan's biography, and it's fun. When fresh troops began the push into France, Jordan was furloughed home. He didn't think he would be returned to active duty, but as his time at home grew to a close, he received orders to proceed to the West Coast to embark for the Pacific. After a long and very slow and very confused trip, Jordan finally arrived in time to participate in the initial landings at Okinawa. Let me make one comment about this. The Japanese changed their tactics at Okinawa, and the other earlier invasions, they were meeting them on the beach, and they decided this time they were going into the mountains and the hill country, and they were going to get the Americans on the beach, and then they were going to annihilate them. So the actual landing at Okinawa was not as brutal as some of the other landings had been. In his memoir, Sam Doherty wrote that on Okinawa, the 1st Engineer Special Brigade headquarters quickly assumed total responsibility for the operation of all the unloading and outloading, wounded and POWs, as well as the U.S. main supply dumps and depots on Okinawa, operating on 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. And for Jordan's special responsibilities, he was also working closely with the team developing the U.S. plan for the invasion of Japan. There was general agreement from experiences on other islands in the Pacific Rim that the Japanese would fight relentlessly until no one lived in order to defend the Japanese mainland islands. The U.S. had targeted Okinawa because it was close to Japan. It had the best place, it had plenty of place to organize for an invasion. There were adequate harbors for ships and multiple airfields. As he worked with the team on the details of the invasion of Japan, Captain Ralph Jordan believed that he'd been very lucky to have engaged in so many invasions and battles and had come away alive with a Purple Heart for a shoulder injury. He said he had a premonition that he would not live through the invasion of Japan. However, before that invasion could come, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs and Japan surrendered. Jordan always believed that the bombs and the end of the war saved his life. He was promoted to major and then discharged from his military duties of coaching young soldiers at war. Jordan returned to his family, his wife Evelyn and 2 daughters, Susan and Darby. I haven't seen either of them here, or did they make it? Ralph Jr. had a city council meeting. He is retired from TVA and lives up on a lake outside of Knoxville and regrets he could not be here. A son, Ralph Jr., was born in 1947. Jordan resumed his basketball coaching at Auburn in 1945-46. But the new Auburn football regime really had no place for him. So Jordan left Auburn and joined the staff of the Miami Seahawks, a new football professional team. Later, he joined Wally Butt's staff at the University of Georgia as head basketball coach and football line coach. When he was hired as the head football coach at Auburn in February 1951, a small-town Georgia newspaper ran this headline: Auburn hires Georgia basketball coach as head football coach. Coach Jordan remained coaching he resumed coaching, and now victory meant only winning a game. When teaching young men to play football did not put lives at stake. He came home with a memory full of stories of brave men, never thinking he was one of those. He had stories of victories in battle, of sacrifices, and of a time when defeat could mean much more than loss of a game. Shug Jordan was a great coach because he was a great man, and he was a great man because of his parents and his church, because of Paul Grist and the YMCA in Selma, and because of Professor Petrie, and because of Auburn. He had the ability to work with young men and inspire them to do the best they could. He could talk, and he could also listen. He always had time for little people as well as the big people, and he made each person feel they were important to him. He never gave up on young men, but was willing to give them a second and even a third chance. Jordan had an uncanny memory. If he met you once, he could remember not only your name, but he could also recall the names of your children and your spouse. Jordan remained a student of history, and he especially continued to read military history and collect war stories. From generals, he drew stories of leadership, and from battles, inspiration for victory. He collected war stories about smaller forces that defeated more powerful armies due to condition, coordination, confidence, and desire. Growing up in the Alabama Black Belt, Jordan learned from classic Alabama storytellers how to spin a tale, savor the moral lesson, and deliver the inspirational line at just the right emotional moment. Jordan learned to use words to inspire, and although they were delivered in an easy, off-the-cuff style, they were actually planned and well thought-out speeches. Thank you. I've got one story I'll start off sharing with you, and then while you're thinking about what you want to ask me. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk at an Auburn elder hostel on what it was like to be an Auburn assistant football coach's wife for 16 years. And in the process, I told the story of Miss Mabin Beard. Now, Miss Mabin Beard was once Miss Monroeville, and she was married to Jeff Beard, the athletic director, and she was every ounce a lady. And she and Miss Jordan would have these little coffees for the assistant coaches' wives every late August and September, so we could find out what had happened, so we could get all ready for the season coming. And so we would go to these coffees. And in September of 1957, Miss Mabin Beard showed up at the coffee and opened a piece of tissue paper that was in her pocketbook. And there was a yellow feather. We were amazed, and she explained to us that yellow feathers were very lucky and that we were going to have a marvelous football season at Auburn because of her yellow feather. Well, we did. We won the national championship that year. And so I tell this story in Auburn Elder Hostel, and sitting right down in front of me was Susan Jordan. And I looked at Susan, and she looked like she had swallowed a canary or something. She was laughing. And so when it came question time, she held her hand up, and she said, "Leah, you know, Mama died." I said, "Yes, and I'm so sorry." And she said, "And I've been cleaning out her house." And I said, "I know that's hard." She said, "It is." And she said, "About 2 weeks ago, I was cleaning out her lingerie drawer. And I found in the back of it a Ware's jewelry box, cardboard jewelry box. And I was so excited, I wondered what Mama had hidden back there. And I pulled it out and opened the top of it, and it was full of yellow feathers." She said if I'd known the story, I would not have thrown away the yellow feathers.
Thank you all for coming. We're recording today's session, so if you would please raise your hand, and either myself or Georgia Ann would pass you the microphone.
Is this going? Yeah. This is dangerous, giving me the microphone in front of. I just want to know, you know anything about Lorenzo? You want to talk about him coming?
Well, there's a really good book, that biography of Gene Lorenzo that came out. Yes, I know a lot. He and George were best buddies. In fact, they roomed together constantly when they were on the road. And one thing that you don't do is you don't bother them before a game. But we were shy a ticket for one of our kids and one of the boys. And so George called me and said, Gene and I found a ticket, so come down to the hotel. It was the one in Birmingham. It was for the Alabama game. And so come on down here right now because we got a meeting. I jumped in the car and came down there. And so George opened the door and I walked into the room. And there was Gene Lorenzo in a chair between the two double beds. George had obviously been sitting on the bed beside him. And the TV was on Saturday cartoons. And I said, I was just dumbfounded, I thought they could think of something, and so I started teasing them. I found out this was routine. They said it kept them from worrying about the game or anything, and so I could just envision these two coaches sitting there watching Saturday morning cartoons before football games. I don't know what else. There are a lot of things to tell about Gene Lorenzo, but he was a wonderful coach. He was very stern. The kids loved him. He would have done most anything that they needed or wanted within limits. And he, and of course, and Jane lived in the Center Cottage in Grove Center. And that was they were chaperoning all the boys. And so the players probably knew Gene and Jane better than they do any of the others.
We have a question over there.
Ms. Atkins, many people here are of us.
Just call me Leah.
Leah, many people here of a certain age, of course, probably either knew or remembered Coach Jordan, those of us that did. But we have people in younger generations in our families and our friendships. What would be your advice as far as his legacy that we could tell that is even important today?
If you mean, what is the one essence? I mean, the one thing of Coach Jordan, he was a man of, it's just hard to describe. And I've tried to give you a sense of it in my paper, but he was a compassionate man, brilliant. He remembered everything that he'd heard or seen. I could tell our second son, Brian, this is one story, was taking ceramics, and he wanted to make something for Coach Jordan. Okay, that's fine. So he worked and worked and worked, and when he finally brought it home, all glazed, he had this very crude ashtray about like this that had a tiger, but it didn't look like a tiger, but I mean, you could figure it was a tiger. And he had done it in blue with a little orange. And so he had to go take that to Coach Jordan. So I called the secretary and I said, when would we not bother him and so forth? And she gave me a time. And so we came in. He was waiting for us. And Brian came in and handed this to him. He had it wrapped up in newspaper, I think. And so he gave it to Coach Jordan. And Coach Jordan just bragged on it. He put it right in the front of his desk right here. And I want you all to know, and this is the gospel truth, I came back about 8 or 9 months later, and that little ashtray was sitting right where Brian had put it. And after Coach Jordan died, I told Ralph Jr. about the story about his daddy, about how really kind he was to children and other people. I mean, that's just the way he was. And I told him about the ashtray, and he said, you know what? I saw that the other day. It's in a box of Daddy's things that we loaded up when we unloaded his office, and I wondered where that ashtray came from. And so I said, well, next time you see it and you don't want it, let us know. We'd like to get it back. He hasn't, and probably it won't be found, but that's the kind of person that he was. He loved children, and he was just so very kind. Now, he could be tough, and I won't say he had a temper, but he could get angry if you weren't doing the things that he thought that you ought to be doing. And okay, what was the Auburn football game? Who was the punter that instead of punting ran it for a touchdown? Connie Frederick. Yeah, thank you. It's my brain. George and Jean had noticed that the Alabama punter did not that the Alabama line in blocking for the punter went down and didn't really didn't really go against the offensive line of the one who was punting. I'll get this right in a minute. And so they told Connie that if it looked like he could make the first down and the Alabama line was not charging him, to go ahead and try to make it. But if he started, he better jolly well make it because Coach Jordan was going to have a fit. And so the situation came up and the Alabama line backed up. And so Connie, instead of punting the ball, Connie put it under his eye and he started running. Coach Jordan turns to Jean Lorenzo and said, "What's going on? What the blank blank's going on?" And he was very upset. And, of course, at that moment, Jean and George didn't confess a thing. And then Coach Jordan started screaming, "Run, Connie, run." And, of course, Connie ran all the way to the end zone. They would have been, off with your head if Connie hadn't made it to the first down anyway. But it was there are just so many stories of things like this that
Hi. You've spoken a lot about his influence with the young men who he taught and other young people. I would like you to talk a little bit more about the influence he had on the coaching and who he mentored and their futures that he cultivated.
He really mentored all of them. I think that those who had really played for him read him better than some of the coaches that came in from other, from other schools and had no history with Coach Jordan that much, but were very good coaches. There's no question that he was able to do one of his talks. Watch out, you're going to get one of Coach Jordan's talks, And what this meant was you were going to get to sit down and discuss with him this particular issue that he wanted to be sure was worked out. But he had a heart of gold, and of course, it was a wonderful way to grow up. Well, all the kids in the athletic department of the coaches' kids, they had the run of the stadium. They had a ticket and they had a sideline pass. But Coach Beard had the stadium locked down, but these kids knew every way they could squeeze through behind a bush and a fence and get in without giving up their ticket. And it was a game that they played. And there were about 6 or 8 or 9 of them at different ages and so forth. And so it was a different era and a different time with a smaller stadium, and the kids had a really good time. One time I'm sitting up under the press box and I looked down, and the game hadn't started yet. And I looked down at the goalpost, and there's this kid that's up on the goalpost. And then there were 2 kids on the goalpost. And I thought, who the heck are those kids? Where's their mother? Climbing on the goalpost, I could fall off. And then I thought, that green shirt, let me borrow the binoculars. And I looked at them. It was my boys that were sitting up on top of the goalpost. There was no way I could get to them. No way we had no cell phones. What in the world was I going to do? Eventually their daddy or somebody saw them and they got down off the goalposts, and they didn't do that anymore.
Any more questions? Don't be shy. Go here.
Yeah.
One quick question. Jordan or Jordan? What is it?
I knew I was going to do that sometime. He said Jordan, but I have been at a place standing there where he said, "I'm Shug Jordan," and Miss Jordan said, "I'm Evelyn Jordan." So I don't know. You know, and I had to watch myself on that, because when I put the coach to it, I always say it the right way, but sometimes when I read it, it doesn't have the coach in it. I say Jordan instead of Jordan.
Are you the Leah Rawls, who was an accomplished water skier back in the 50s?
Yeah.
I remember you.
World's water ski champion. World.
That's my press person right there. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Got to get out of the state of Alabama. You know, we had, you know, the Depression had, and then the war came, and we just didn't do much traveling. You know, we couldn't afford it and all of that stuff. And so when I started competing in water skiing, I got to go places that I never would have had the opportunity to go. I worked in Italy one summer, which was great. The Italian Water Ski Association invited me to come over and work with their team for the next year. I was working with them one summer, and that was a lot of fun, and got to see a lot of, you know, places and different things. I remember we were crossing Lake George on a ferry, and I was up at the front of it, and this guy, I knew who he was, but I didn't know who he was. And I came back, I said, Daddy, you've got to come up here, because there's a famous guy in an army truck, and he's got a general's thing on it. And so we came to the front, and I was pointing, there, Daddy. The minute I started pointing, he turned around at Daddy, and my daddy said, "Oh, General Omar Bradley, I'm so glad to meet you. This is my daughter." But it was a different world, and I think that it helped me a lot as far as seeing that there were a lot of things out there that weren't in Birmingham, Alabama, that I wanted to do and see. And a lot of it I got through history, because I just, there is no question that World War II affected me as a child growing up in that era more than anything, and influenced my life. As I saw my cousins go out off to service, and some of them not come home, and they were all over the place, from Sitka, Alaska, to North Africa, to various places, and it was the whole family. We had a big world map on the hallway in Sis's grandmother's house and my grandmother's house, and we had pins on it, and we had on those pins where people were. And Uncle Bruce had one of these purple mimeograph machines, and before everybody left, he gave them a code so they could talk about bananas or potatoes or something or another, and he'd know they were in North Africa or they were headed to the Far East. And so he was able to pinpoint and plot exactly. We didn't tell anybody we knew, but we knew where they were. And the letters were all saved, and it was, and some of them are here at the archives, including one that's upstairs that my cousin, Sis, that I've always called her Sis. I'm an only child. She's not my sister. And her brother wrote to my daddy from Italy. He was a fighter pilot over Italy, North Africa first, and then Italy. How many missions? He got 55 missions and could come home, but he gave them to one of his buddies who had 2 children at home, and he was not married. So he stayed for one more round of missions and let him go home. And anyway, I thank y'all very much. Oh,
it's a great picture on the screen. I just wanted to point out that one of the players on this team was Marvin Trott, an optometrist here in Montgomery, and he's pictured second from the right there, in case you missed that, Dr. Marvin Trott.
Thank you for telling me.
Thank you all for coming. We'll give Dr. Atkins another round of applause.